All right, everybody, we're going to take some pre-engine mounting measurements. The first thing I'm going to do is bolt the cowl on, and then I'm going to measure the spinner gap. So I'm going to put a ruler in there from the center of those crosshairs to the edge of the cowl ring. We're going to take a measurement. It's going to be about 6 3/8. Your plane will probably be roughly plus or minus a couple sixteenths here or there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, even though the standoffs are supplied, we're going to measure the motor. We're just going to make sure where we need to be as far as standoff size and how many fender washers you can add or need to add to the base of the standoff. So here we're going to take this measurement and then we're going to subtract this measurement from the cowl measurement. And the difference between the motor and the spinner and the cowl is your standoff size. That's sort of how you figure standoff size. So here you can see the little calculation. You got a 3/16 spinner gap desired. So you're roughly looking for a 14/16 size standoff. The supplied standoffs are 12/16, and this will allow you to adjust your spinner gap with a fender washer behind the standoff. Here's your motor template. So we're going to go ahead and take the cowl back off and show you how now this is really important. You can see there's multiple lines on the firewall. There's one line right in the center, which is the crosshairs for the exact center. Oh yeah, these holes here are the holes that we're going to drill. Those are for the DA70. But don't pre-drill any of these other holes. These holes are for multiple different types of throttle mounting arms and different motors and different mounting situations. So we're not going to drill those right now, and we'll show you that later. But we're going to fit this template on here, and we're going to first make sure that the crosshair lines, the thrust lines that you see here, match up to the thrust lines, the thrust line on the right, which is making up for giving you the thrust that you need in your motor that's built into the firewall. So here you just want to make sure you get this, make sure this is fit in really nice and down flat. You don't want, when you're drilling these holes, you don't want your drill bit to walk, or you don't want anything. You want to be very careful when drilling these holes, but you want to make sure that this mount is down flush against the firewall. And then I even go as far as to just clamp it. I don't want anything moving. It's always a good idea to clamp it, and then we're just going to drill the holes. And you want to be very careful. You don't want to put a lot of pressure on your drill when you're drilling the holes. That makes your drill actually sort of walk. You just want to I'll speed this up for you, but you just want 4 good holes, and then we'll move on. We'll take this off. You can see that we got the holes drilled. It's very simple to drill the holes. You just want to take your time doing it. So here's the fender washers I was talking about. I'm going to put these behind the standoffs. It's just something I like to do to disperse that, to keep your standoff from pulling into the firewall as you tighten the motor. This will alleviate that. But when you're using fender washers, they come in multiple sizes from the factory. So just take a time to measure them all and get all the same size fender washers. Sometimes they can be a little bigger. You don't want to throw anything off. Not that it's going to hurt it horribly, but just make sure they're all the same size. Pick 4 that are right, and then we're going to put those behind the fender washers. And then now your fender washers or your standoffs won't pull into the firewall at all. So you could really screw up the thrust of the motor if you pull one standoff too far in or not. You can see I notched this one for the washer on the firewall. I don't like to force things or tighten them down when they're not sitting flush. So here we're just going to, on the outside, we're going to use a regular I just use a regular stainless washer with a stainless 1/4 20 bolt. And then, so the order of assembly is then the standoff, and then I'm going to use my fender washer. And then you put your fender washer on there, and then behind there is a regular washer and a nylock nut. So that's what it's going to look like on the other side of the firewall. Now the fender washer is optional. That's something I like to do. It just keeps you from pulling your standoffs into the firewall, which is easy to happen if you tighten it down too much. So here we're just going to do the other standoffs. I'll try to speed this up for you a little bit because it all looks the same, and then we'll go on the back side and tighten them all up once we get all these on here. Alright, so that's what that's going to look like. Now we're going to just, the quarter 20 bolt on the back, we're just going to hold that with a wrench, and then I'm going to snug these down. I'm not going to use this wrench to hold them, to tighten them up all the way. I'm just going to get these all snug down. And then that's it as far as the motors. Now we're going to move on to some other areas. We're going to mount the cowl here, and you can see now we're just checking that alignment for the spinner gap. You can see we want to make sure that the cowl is flush, because it's hard. It can be deceiving. You want to make sure that cowl is flush against the firewall, and then you can mount the. So it looks like we're really close. We may need a tiny bit of shimming, but in here you can see the cowl gap is, with those thrust washers, is 2/16 of an inch. So that's perfect cowl gap, or spinner gap, I'm sorry. And that's mounting the motor. Okay, so now we're going to mount the throttle servo. You can see I already have the grommets and the spacers in there, and I'm just going to mount the throttle servo in the supplied hole. Now I'm going to briefly go over the linkage. I do have some videos on my YouTube channel on how to set up a throttle servo properly. I'm not going to go into detail on that during this video, but I will show you how to set it, how this plane should be set up. So I'm just going to throw a little, after I pre-drill the holes, as you've seen there, I'm going to throw a little lock or thin CA on there. This helps the wood from splitting and cracking while you're screwing your servo screws down. Spray a little kicker on it, wipe it off, make sure it's dry before you put your servo on there, because sometimes you can glue your servo to the wood. But so here you can see obviously the servo drive is going to go on the throttle side of the engine, and I'm just putting in the servo screws here. That's obviously basic, so I got it sped up, but it gives you an idea. Of what that process looks like. And then here you can see how I have the throttle servo arm set up, and the linkage on this particular on the 93 here. So you can, now what you want to make sure, and you can go watch my other YouTube video on throttle servo setup, is you want the throttle linkage to be the endpoints to be the same, 100 100, and you can also see, or 80/80 or whatever, but you can also see how I flip that DA arm around so it's facing up instead of down. You can see that right there. And then you want to make sure that your throttle's all the way open, and when you're setting it up, so that you can see that that butterfly is moving all the way open. Again, check out my other YouTube video for throttle servo setup. Okay, now we're going to move on to mounting the can and the header. Here you can see the different the stuff that's supplied with the kit, the different header mounts, or can mounts, I'm sorry, and the silicone vibration dampeners that go on to your can mount. So here you can see we're just going to take these and that you just slip them on each one of these notches, just like that, and they're made to sort of move around because all they're doing at this point is dampening the vibration of your can. And then the other thing you want to make sure you do is that you pick the right can mount. So depending on the diameter of your can, there's 3 different mounts supplied in the kit. So we're just going to get all these vibration dampeners on here, and these are just silicone tubing cut to length. And then we're going to, and you can see here that your can just slides right over those, and those sit up against your can just like that. And that just keeps a little bit of movement and vibration dampening. You can see here, this is the very first one. This one's mounted to the landing gear block, the front of the landing gear block. So you can see here, I did slightly modify this a little bit to move the mount up or towards the bottom of the plane, because the plane's flipped upside down right now. So I moved it up to make sure that the header, as you can see here, that the header is aligned. And if I put that mount the way it was before, the header was a little offline. So you may need to move that around a touch. So here's the header, and I'm gonna slide that mount on there, and then I'm gonna work this. You can see where I sort of notched the header out, and I'm gonna mount it on there, which allows it to move up a little. And then I'm gonna put the other header mount on first, or I'm gonna slip that on the other side of the pipe, and then I'm gonna get the pipe, or the header, I'm gonna get the can sort of pushed into place here. And you can see here, I'm using a TDH 110, so I'm using a longer can. So I had to make an exit hole in the bottom of the fuselage. It's real easy. You just cut a nice little exit hole in there. And then I'm going to push this mount up against the landing gear block. And then I'm going to use short servo screws. And you can see how I just put that in there and I pushed it up. That's to make sure that lines up with the header. So I'm going to push it up, and then I'm going to use servo screws to mount that to the landing gear block. And then you can see at the bottom there, or the top of the can tunnel, I put a little block of wood, and that helps with that first mount. So here you can see I'm just double checking the alignment of the canister, or the header to the canister, and you can see here it looks pretty good, and that's what you want it to look like. So now we're going to go ahead and once you got that all screwed down, we're going to put this is the Teflon connector that connects the header to the can. So I'm just going to heat it up with a heat gun. I'm going to get it nice and hot, not to the point where you're melting it or anything, but it does make it really easy to push on when it's heated. So you can see there, I just push it on. It's that simple. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a pair of pliers, and I'm going to push I'm going to put the clamp on. And you can notice that I'm arranging the clamp so that slot in the clamp is facing the bottom of the plane. And I'm going to show you that in a minute, because we're going to actually pin the header with a little servo screw. And then I use the clamp, and I'll show you that in 1 second. And that's what we're going to do right here. I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to use a little drill little Dremel. And I'm going to drill a little pilot hole right, and I'm going to use this screw. See how the screw's got a little flange on it? I'm going to show you a neat little trick. So I'm going to drill this pilot hole right in the center of the can and the Teflon. Now I'm going to pull the clamp out, and then I'm going to put that little screw in there. And this isn't hurting anything as far as how your engine's running or anything like that. But I'm going to put this servo screw in here, and then I'm going to put the clamp over the top of that. So you can see that there's a little slot in the clamp. I'll put it over, and then I'm going to rotate the clamp so that slot sits over the flange on that screw, and that screw will never come off when you do that. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the header, and then this way your header and your can will never come apart. If you've ever had that happen, it's not always real good, and it can cause different things to happen. So we're going to go ahead, heat that up. Make sure your clamp is already on your header, as you can see. And we're going to heat that up. Just grab a hold of that, and then we're going to slip it on there. So we'll push that on. And then you don't want to push the header so far in that you don't want to push the header up against the can inside that Teflon. You want to leave a little bit of room for that to flex a little bit, and if they're rigid up against each other, could make weird harmonic vibrations and even damage one or the other, the can or the pipe. So, and I'll show you that in a minute. I always leave a gap, and so you're balancing that gap against the can and the header against it being mounted. And you can see I'm just going to use a flashlight. I shine it on there, and I got a little too much of a gap right now. So I'm watching the header and how it lines up to the motor, and I'm just going to get that, push it in as far as you need it to get the gap right. And then once you feel like you got the header lined up on the engine and the header is not touching the can inside the Teflon, then you just want to make sure that it's lined up. So what I actually am going to do is I'm going to bolt the header on. I always like to do that just in case anything moves or anything's weird. I'm not bolting it on for its final assembly. I'm just bolting it on to make sure that this is all centered and everything's square. So here you got to make sure that stinger is also, you know, is straight. It's centered as you're hooking this up. You can just turn it a little. You see, make sure that it's there, because we're going to pin the header. Then here you can see I'm using the flashlight again. I want to show you, it should show up on camera here. You can see, just barely see the gap. And if you can see light through there, so about a 1/16 or a 2/16 of a gap between the header and the can. And I was a little bit small on that gap, so there you go. Now you can see it a little better. Now we're got a bigger gap and they're not touching. And then now we're gonna go ahead and put the clamp on, and we'll pin the header as well, just like the same exact thing that we did to the can. We're now going to do the header, and you can see that the clamp has, or at least this clamp has, a sort of a slot in it, and the slot's big on one side and it's small on the other side, and it tapers down. So I line that clamp up, and then I'm going to make the pilot drill. You see, I'm going to line that clamp up, and now I'm going to make the pilot drill with my Dremel. And your header's your header is stainless steel and your can is aluminum, so it's a little bit, a little bit harder to drill into your can. You can see I had my thumb over the carburetor. I didn't want anything getting down in there. You can tape it off or do whatever. But so I moved that clamp back, and now I'm going to screw just like I did I'm going to screw this down just like I did. Now you'll be all set. For this will all be one unit now, since you got your mounts are installed, and it's not mounted to the motor yet, but you'll still be able to sort of finagle it around if need be. But here you can see I'm moving that clamp to sit over the top of that, and you'll be all set with mounting this, mounting your can. And you can see, I'll show you what that looks like from the top. You can see how I move that slot to sit right over the flange of that bolt on both of them. And then that clamp actually helps hold that screw from ever coming out from vibration or whatever. So it's a great way to pin your header and your can, make sure that never comes apart. So now that we got the motor mounted and we have the cans lined up, now we're going to use, now a lot of people say don't use the gaskets, just use this ultra copper high heat silicone. I disagree. I think the gaskets are there for a reason. So I'm going to put, and it's not going to be depicted in the video here, but I'm going to put a very thin layer of this copper on both sides of the gasket. And then I'm going to put the gasket aside for about a half hour. And I'm going to let the gasket, I'm going to let the copper, I'm going to let it set up a little bit dry. This way, when you smash it down, you don't smash down all the, you don't smash out, when you bolt it down, you don't smash out all the Permatex. You let it set up a little bit, let it dry, and then it acts more like a gasket a sealer versus just smashing it all out of there. So this is sort of a little important step, is let's set this aside, let it dry a little bit prior to putting the gaskets on. Now here, what I did in this video is I just set it on there and I didn't tighten the bolts down all the way. But I also, to help the bolts from coming out, I put the high heat temp silicone right on the threads of the bolt. And then I'm just going to thread those in and I've never had a header come loose. So we'll just do each one of these. Get it on the threads there. And then we'll get this bolted up. And then you just do that to the other set of bolts. And one more to go here. And this is, once I get this screwed down, this is the point at which you'll just I just let it dry from here. You know, maybe give it a while, an hour or so. I'm just gonna snug these. I'm not gonna like smash this down yet. I'm just gonna let it actually, well, I think in the video here I just tightened them down all the way, but if you let it dry, it'll prevent it from smashing out all the silicone that you put on there. So here you can see I'm just torquing these down, and then I get a regular Allen wrench and make sure that these are tight. And then that's it. That's pretty much mounting your header, your can, and your motor. Pretty simple stuff. Alright guys, here you can see we're going to just mount the ignition. I know you guys all know how to mount ignitions for the most part. On the 93, I just mount the ignition on the side here. You can see I'm using a aftermarket Seacraft ignition. This is an ignition holder, so I can get a strap underneath it and strap it down nice and tight. But you can see here I'm just screwing that to the side of the motor box. Some people like to put the ignition inside and then put your two spark plug leads out both of those large holes you can see right by my hand where I'm screwing in this. Some people like to put the ignition on the top. This is all personal preference. I just thought I'd show you where I mounted the ignition. You can see this is sort of the done product and how it looks. So this makes it for a nice, neat install.